Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Trucking Conversations. I'm your host, Justin Holden. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to talk about what my partners at ReadyApp are building. At ReadyApp, our mission is to create a more connected transportation industry by helping professional drivers, carriers, brokers, CDL schools, and industry partners build stronger, more trusted relationships throughout modern technology. Through the Driver Verify and ReadyApp Digital Passport, our growing technology platform, we're working to help students build their professional identity before they even graduate CDL school. By connecting schools, students, and employers, we believe we can simplify the hiring, improving communications, and creating a smoother transition from the classroom to successful driving careers. My guest today has dedicated more than 3 decades to prepare the next generation of professional drivers. Martin Garsee serves as Director of Transportation Training at Houston Community College, where he oversees one of the nation's most respected public CDL training programs. He also serves as Executive Director of the National Association of Public Funded Trucking Drive Schools, an organization committed to promoting high quality public truck drivers education through the United States. Throughout his career, Martin has worked closely with trucking companies, FMCSA, community colleges, workforce development organizations, and transportation leaders to improve CDL education and strengthen the pipeline of the future professional driver. Martin, welcome to Trucking Conversations.
Thank you, Justin, for having me. Looking forward to some discussion on where it all begins with good training for the driver, getting him ready and getting them into the right company where they continue to have a great career and are continue to be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a joy to have you. It's a good conversation I think we'll have, especially for maybe my listeners that are thinking about getting into the industry, what they need to know, what they need to learn in advance. Unfortunately, our industry, we never get good publicity, right? It's always negative stuff. So it's good to have you on here to kind of talk about the schooling system, the right way to do it. So these drivers can be more prepared once they start their career. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to start at the beginning of your story. You've got, over 30 years in the industry. Would love to know what got you into the trucking side of the world, and then what got you into the driver education side.
Yeah, my story is probably a little bit different than most of the school directors. I don't come from a trucking background. In fact, my dad and both of my grandfathers worked for the railroad. So
Oh,
while
okay.
transportation's in the blood, it wasn't trucking. But I'd worked for Houston Community College part time as a driver education, teenage driver education, and some adult education for the driver training. And so, of course, that's been mandated training for many years in Texas. And so I was doing behind the wheel, did a little bit of classroom and some defensive driving and things like that as a part time job. Had a couple of friends that was working there. And I think that's the way most of us, in that day learned about different things and got in the right place at the right time. So I enjoyed it, but it was part time, and so the college was always getting phone calls going, "Do you do CDL driving in the teen department?" No, we don't. And so there was a gentleman in the at that time, Van O'Neill, that was in that department also, and he took the initiative to start doing some research. And long story short, was able to get a budget and all the things needed to start a program. And so I continued on, and in my full-time job, I worked in outside sales. And so he landed a couple of really good contracts for contract training back in about 1996, late 95, early 96. And so he kind of got overwhelmed, and we'd worked closely together. And so he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I need some assistance." Kind of, yeah, CDL is totally different than team driving, but the mechanics of it is a whole lot the same. And of course, the college processes and all that. So the company I worked for actually got bought out, and I was going like, I don't think this is a good deal for me anymore. And so, long story short, I took the job. I didn't know if I would enjoy it. I was used to being outside, outside sales, moving around, sitting, and so going into sitting behind a desk and that type of thing. So, but let's fast forward. I fell in love with the industry, and that was 1997. I came to work full time in the truck driving department, and then he continued on in to 2009, retired, and I took over the department and previous to that, just before that, the college saw what a great opportunity was there and built a facility. We have a beautiful facility here at Houston Community College that's dedicated to the truck driving. And so that's where I've been. And then I've got, I've been very fortunate to be part of, I was part of entry level driver training advisory committee back in 2015 when they started talking about ELDT. Okay. I was one of the 26 people. And so through the association that you mentioned, that I'm the executive director, I was currently president at that time. I was just coming off the term, and the Federal Motor Carrier reached out to different people to form that committee. And so when they did, the board asked me to do it. My college was very kind and allowed me to go to DC for 6 months, about every other week for 3 days, and interact with all the other people. And then of course, entry level driver training went through the process of being a rule and that the whole 9 yards there. But that really gave me such an education on so many different levels of how Federal Motor Carrier operates. And then it gave me a lot of opportunity, because at that point, everybody's wanting to know what is entry level driver training, how is it going to affect me, that type of thing. So I had the opportunity for a lot of speaking engagements, and still do. And so it's been a great ride, and I love the industry. And I say this all the time. I gear myself toward the trucking industry. I attend a TCA conference, ATA conference, a Texas Trucking Association conference, and the education side, is where I work. But it's I love the industry and fell in love with it. It's a great group of people, and you see so many lives changed.
Hey drivers, our partners over at Zero Breeze have designed a no idle air conditioner for sleeper cabs and fleets that can pay for itself in just one summer. If you're spending up to $40 a night in fuel, it's time to stop idling and start saving. For $50 off, email sales@zerobreeze.com or text them at 945-247-1298. And don't forget to ask them about their extended warranty option. Check them out today at zerobreeze.com. Yeah, most definitely. I've been in it about 20, 25 years now. I've kind of been all over, done everything but on a truck pretty much, and or drive a truck. And I'm the same way. I'm very passionate about it. It's the most important industry, in my opinion, throughout what we do here in the United States. And it's the most probably disrespected industry as well. The driver themselves gets no respect. Like, I'll give you an example. As I was telling you for the show, I was driving home last night, well, this morning, 2 to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning on I-40, and there was over 100 trucks parked on the side of the road, which is,
oh yeah,
it just tears me up, and a couple of them were in not a very good spot. I mean, I understand, but there's a couple that was going on to the off ramp. And I mean, it was a dark area, it could have easily somebody ran into them and stuff. And of course, it's just not safe for the driver either. So, just things like that, I always want to try to fix. But I want to start out with the Houston Community College has been developed a tremendous reputation for CDL training. What sets your program different from everybody else's?
Well, I think the one thing that when the program was started, as I mentioned earlier, the gentleman that started it, he visited several schools across the country that had been in business for a while. Mm-hmm. And in the Midwest, some of the technical college systems like in Wisconsin and Oklahoma and places like that had been doing truck driver training for quite a while, and had some really excellent programs. And part of the association, National Association of Publicly Funded Truck Driving Schools, we're not in competition with each other, technical schools, community colleges, whatever it is. We kind of have a district, almost like a school district, that we draw from. So we're not in competition. So we're very eager to share our information. It's not proprietary. It's, right. It's that type of thing. So he built a good, solid foundation from a lot of research that he did, and we continue to improve it. And so that, as things change, we are able to adapt to that. One of the big changes that a lot of us fought, so to speak, was going from teaching manual transmission to teaching automatic. But the industry has changed so much. So when do we make that flip? We can talk about that later on. But staying relevant, and I think the fact that I've been part of so many different aspects of the trucking industry and been able to sit and listen to so many people, leaders of trucking companies and that type of thing. So we're able to stay in tune with what's going on and be able to react. And the college has been very supportive of that. We don't, it's like anything else. We don't get everything we want, but we're,
Right.
we get a lot more than a lot of people. So it's just, we've being in a large city, you almost have unlimited number of people that want to come to school. And of course, a lot of companies, and Houston has one of the largest ports
Yes.
in the United States and the world, whatever. And so there's so much trucking here. Of course, all the chemical plants, we have tanks and a lot of that, a lot of flatbed off of the, and of course the containers and that, all that off the port. So it's just a ready-made, and of course food and all that, comes into town. So because we have such a large population to feed, and so those people have a lot of stuff to haul out. So it's just it's a huge hub for so many different companies, and we've been fortunate enough to keep a good reputation of training in a college world or technical world. We are supported by the state to some degree, and we're supported by our local school, obviously, and then there's a tuition. So we're not under the gun maybe to always turn a profit, or not really turn a profit, but to meet our expenses, that type thing. So we have the luxury of maybe having a little bit longer program at a less expensive price, and a little more latitude on how we can continue to train people and try our best to make that student successful as they can possibly be. Not everybody can be a truck driver. We can talk about that later, but you want people to have that opportunity. And so we're able to create that. And so, and a shout out to my instructors. There's 2, maybe 3 instructors that actually started at the same, maybe a year or 2 before I did at the beginning of the program, that are still here. And their knowledge is just amazing. And their passion is no less today than what it was back then, and that's to create opportunity for that student and get them started in a career that, like they have, their whole life been in the trucking industry as a driver or as an instructor, and supported their family and their family well, and that type of thing. So they pass on that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see your point where y'all are not trying to turn and burn drivers in and out for a profit. You're literally trying to put them in the best situation, and even let them know, or like, hey, maybe this isn't the right career choice, either by knowledge or just the skills of driving a truck, because it's all of it together. So I can definitely see that. I know in the state of Tennessee, they've gotten big over the years. We have TCAPs, well, I think what they call the technical schools now here, and a lot of them have the schools, and I'm with you. I kind of like that a little bit better than these independents, which have been in the news now, and there's the government's got involved in shutting a lot of them down because they're not making a difference. They're just trying to make a profit. So I appreciate the way you look at it there. So a two-part question here. How many students do y'all typically have in a year? And then for any young person that's listening to our show that is thinking about getting into trucking, kind of walk them through an experience from enrollment to graduation. Typically time frame, the different things they have to go through to get to graduation.
We teach about 600 to 800 students a year. Before COVID, we had a couple of years that we were a little bit above that, but for the last couple of years, we've settled in about that area. And we do training for like municipalities, power companies, a couple of trucking companies and that type of thing. But the open enrollment, where a person, a young person or a person looking for a second career, whatever, what we do is we do an orientation, and we talk to people, and we try to explain to them, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to think about, what your driving record look like, what your background look like, that type of thing. And so we try to make sure that they understand the way that they can get in, or if it's something that, they have a recent DWI, like, hey, that's not going to work for you.
Right.
Let's talk about this in a few years. Keep your nose clean, whatever. You want to let them down gently, but at the same time, you want to be fair with them, and fair to to the taxpayer or whatever that's involved in paying part of that training. So we try to do our best, and so we want to make sure that people are, to the best of our knowledge, employable. And then, of course, now that they're drug testing and before they come to school, that type thing. So, one of the misconceptions with a lot of people is, oh, marijuana is legal in my state.
Right.
However, marijuana is not legal for you to drive a truck.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
there's those type of things. So come in with a clean background, a good driving record, and be able to pass a drug test and a physical, and have the right attitude about learning. But as far as a school, there's some areas all there is private schools, and there's some good ones out there. I'm very fortunate to know a lot of those guys too. But what I would say, look at a school and read what they tell you. And to me, red flags in looking at a school is, we teach you to the test, we rent you a truck, we're not licensed by the state because we don't have to be, get your CDL in 24 hours or less, all the different shortcuts. Now, for the guy who grew up on the farm that drove since he was old enough to sit,
Right.
that might work. But the
Yeah.
majority of people nowadays have never driven a standard. They've never backed a trailer. They've never
Yep.
driven anything very large. And then, of course, we could get into the fact that we have a lot of people come in from overseas who have not driven very much and that
Right.
type of thing. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of different things there. So, we look at a school that has a curriculum, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, a 4-week school or longer. Our program is 5 and 6 weeks, and then we do evening weekends, which is longer programs, and we try to
Oh, okay.
accommodate people who work and that type of thing. And so many people do. Some people are limited in how they can do that because of the location or whatever. But anyway, look at the overall, and I would say, once you decide, okay, this might be a good deal, go look at it. Is it in a parking lot that they just use part time and there's just one truck? And also the type of equipment. If you're going to go to work for a major company over the road, which does hire the majority of students, you're going to drive a sleeper truck, tractor, and you're going to pull a 53-foot trailer. So if you use a day cab with a pup trailer or a 20-foot flatbed, that is very unrealistic to what you're going to be doing in the real world. That's a big hang up of mine. It took me a long time to even buy day cabs, and they're tandem axle, but
Mhm.
because that's not exactly what most of the industry is made up of. But anyway, long story short, we have inherited a few and bought a few, and they work. They're tandem axle. They're not single axle. But if you're driving it, especially
Right.
if it's a day cab single axle and a 20-foot trailer, it's not even close.
No, exactly.
And unfortunately, and we can get on a tangent about what federal motor carriers should do, but I'm almost I would like to see maybe more restrictions, like what you test in is what you can drive. Um,
Absolutely. I like
um,
that.
that type of thing. They're adamant about the transmission. If you test an automatic, you can't drive a manual, but you can
Yep.
test in a single axle day cab, a
Yeah.
mid-sized truck with a trailer.
That's almost like cheating, I would think, because you're not learning. I mean, I've never driven a truck. I've driven trailers and stuff, but yeah, I can easily see turning and backing up is a whole lot different than
Right.
a standard sleeper with a 53 footer. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're exactly right, because I used to be in recruiting, and these guys would always have that, automatic restriction, and, the trucks were, manual. And so, yeah, I agree with you. That makes sense a lot. I like that idea.
Those are the things I would look at. I think some people put a lot of weight into maybe feedback and that type of thing. And I can tell you, from the hundreds of students that go through here each year, the only students that really complain, and I'm not saying that we're a perfect school, but the people who complain are the people who, my first deal is, and I'll give you a quick example. A
Hmm.
student has a problem with whatever, they didn't teach me such and such or whatever. And I go, okay, I pull up their attendance and go, okay, well, you missed classes. So let's talk about that. And the majority of people come through, and I always laugh because people go, oh, my, so and so went through your class. Do you remember so and so's name or whatever? And I'll say no. And that's a good thing, because typically the only people I talk to are people who, I'm kind of like the principal. If they're in trouble, I
Right.
know who they are. I've had to deal with them and that type of thing. So,
Right.
look at the school, look at the equipment. there's a lot of good schools out there, and I can go briefly into what you mentioned earlier, if you don't mind, about the
Sure.
negative publicity.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that it's a bad thing and it's a good thing, because this administration is the first administration that's actually attacked the problem, or addressed the problem, maybe is a better word, has
Yeah.
addressed the problem of the proliferation of the number of people that went on the training provider registry who should not be on there. And the rule is very specific, but Federal Motor Carrier did not enforce their own rules for several years. And that's where you see, the thousands of people that are now, quote, training providers. Um, Self certification is what they decided to do. And we know that, unfortunately, a lot of people are not honest. They say they have a curriculum, they say they have a training range, they say they have all the things that they're supposed to have, and they're not even certified by the state or licensed by the state to do business in. And so, kudos to Federal Motor Carrier. They've done 2 rounds of audits. I think the last one they
Mhm.
call investigation, and they're shedding some light. And in that, and you can read the figures somewhere. When they sent out the notice, there's some people who just folded the tent and say, "Oh, we're not really training anymore." Okay, well, that's good, because probably shouldn't have been on there to begin with. And then they
Right.
found some. So they'll continue to do that. We have the assurance, several of us that work very closely with Federal Motor Carrier. We have
Mhm.
assurance from the administrator. The Derek Bars,
Yeah,
the
he's
administrator, is very adamant about that,
he
and
is.
very, very passionate. And so we've encouraged him. In fact, I met with him Monday
Oh,
in
wow.
DC, and we encouraged him to, hey, when you have the facts of a bad school, let's also counter that with a good school.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily calling names, but there's a lot of us out there, and
Oh,
there's two
absolutely.
associations that I'll mention: our publicly funded, and then
Mhm.
there's a CVTA, Commercial Vehicle Training Association, which is private schools, and a lot of those are long schools that's been in business for a long time. And I think that longevity is an important factor. It's not the only factor, but when people have been in business for a long time, and especially maybe in a smaller area where the word of mouth is king, um,
Right.
there's probably there's some good things there. So at the end of the day, those of us that belong to association, typically we're all trying to do the right thing. We're doing the right thing, and we want to do better, and that's why we belong to association, so we can interact and have, maybe have a voice with with Federal Motor Carrier, or with the lobbyist group or whatever, because we represent a lot of people. And so it's, when you come and say, between the two organizations we train about 150,000 people a year, that raises some eyebrows to congressmen, to, different people. Go, hey, we're the people who are providing a lot of the training, and this is
Mhm.
what's important. So we're seeing
Yeah,
a lot
and
of progress with Federal Motor Carrier.
yeah, absolutely. And I've had a lot of guests on over the last couple months with everything going on, negativity in trucking. And one thing that I hear a lot is they're underfunded and understaffed. And I had Mr. Mullen on. This episode hadn't came out yet, but he was the lead counsel for the FMCSA from like 2018, I think, to 2022 or 2023, and he's of course appointed by the president. And he was giving us numbers of the comparison of the FMCSA and the FAA, and it's
Oh yeah,
astounding the amount of money that they get to where the trucking don't. And I always said way back in the day that when 9/11 happened, the trucking community should have been brought right into that. I mean,
right,
security checkpoints, driver verification, almost like a tower for somebody to watch where trucks are all the time, because they are 80,000 bombs, and you're driving down the road, it can
right.
do a lot more damage. So I hope with this administration, and I hope it continues with the next administration, that they can start allotting more money and more people to a sector that is probably the most, in my opinion, the most important sector in the industry, not or in the country, not only in just products and all that, but security. I mean, it's a homeland security issue every single day. So I want to talk with you about the next generation of drivers. I've noticed over my 20 some odd years, it has really started to change. You know, uh, I've talked with and knew a lot of the what I call the good old boys, that was
Right.
before ELDs. They were gone for months at a time. They hustled, And it seems like now that the newer generation, they want to be home daily. They don't want to be out 2 or 3 weeks. They definitely want to be home every weekend. And the industry's kind of changed a little bit towards that to have to accommodate, because you got to do what you got to do with what the people in front. But the one thing that bothers me, and maybe you can shed some light, or you have an ideal for it, is trying to get the attention and attract younger people to want to come into trucking. So I was at the Texas Truck Show last week and met with a lot of drivers. I actually met with a father and son, and I ended up giving him my personal information. His father really didn't know a lot about trucking, and his son was in school, I believe, at Houston Community College, and or he was fixing to start or whatever. And he had really no clue. And so I kind of gave him my advice, gave him my personal information. You ever have a question, call me. I don't mind. And I told him simple. I said, he was, I think, 21 or 22, somewhere in there. I said, you're at the right age to start getting hired by pretty much everybody. I said, stay a company driver, learn the industry, figure stuff out. Don't buy a home. Don't rent an apartment. If you're not serious with anybody right now, don't get serious in a relationship, and go and just drive. See the country. Tell your dispatcher you want to stay 2 hours from Yellowstone, and rent a car and take a couple days off, see the country. No need to having all them expenses. And then when you get 30, after you've got the experience, then you start a home life, and try to be more of a regional guy. And I said that way you'll be able to stay longer at communities. But it worries me because with all the bad publicity, I would imagine it's harder to get people to want to come do it, because it's a great job. I mean, yeah, we talk about the negativity, the disrespect that the drivers do receive on the road from, all of us regular, car passengers. But, what do you have to do to try to attract the new younger people to come into the industry?
Well, at a college, we're tasked with spending a lot of time in with us at Houston Independent School District, and so we have a lot of interaction with students, and so we try to plant that seed. But there again, there's that whole thing, and we could do a whole segment on the 18-year-old driver, and the 21-year-old, 18 to 21.
Yeah.
But we know that it's unfortunate that a person can't drive. If you're in Houston and you want to haul a load of chemicals to Lake Charles, Louisiana, you can't do it. It's only maybe 80 miles or whatever. But if you want to go to El Paso, which is 800 miles, you can do that, or to Amarillo, which is 600 or whatever,
Absolutely.
The magic of crossing a invisible line makes a difference in how you drive, whatever. But anyway, and we go back to not every person needs to be a truck driver or can be a truck driver. It doesn't matter if they're 55 or they're 18 or 21 or 24. And so when you were talking about earlier a little bit about having maybe maybe we'll get to the point where we have a little bit of testing, and there's several things out there that people use, and we won't get into all that, but more of a job matching type thing, that type of thing, because the worst thing that you can do is put the wrong person in there and then them tell 20 of their friends how horrible it is, and that's what I think we see sometimes, the bad experience, and because it's not the right person, or not the right company or whatever. And we could talk about that, but there's a couple of initiatives out there. Colleges tend to have that task to go out and be a part of the community. Also, there's a group called Next Generation Trucking. Lindsay Trent is the part of that association, and David Dine, which was in Patterson High School, just retired. He had a truck driving program inside of high school, maybe the first one in the United States, for about, 15, 20 years. And just remarkable how that school, embraced that. And he taught people, and he was in Patterson is a very agricultural heavy part of California. And so they needed a lot of drivers, and a lot of people were geared toward that. And so it was a long program. Of course, obviously they couldn't get their license, but they could go through a whole year of driver training, before there was ELDT even. He was doing that. and he had simulators, and he even come up with a golf cart and come up with the measurements of a trailer to kind of simulate the tractor trailer on backing. And, he just very creative. And so that's caught on to some degree, but, we've gotten away from skills, and we hear a lot of that in the high schools, and hopefully that returns. And whether it's diesel mechanic, and we could go through auto mechanics, they're all suffering from that, carpenters, that type of thing. So the skills trade by going into that. So Next Gen has done a good job. We partner with them in a lot of things to promote that, because even if a high school's teaching, typically they need to come somewhere for their driving when they get out. So I think that the image, ever since I've been in this industry, there's been an image campaign by ATA and different people to try to enhance that image. But it is a hard job. And what you said earlier, a person that's willing to go out and spend the time and effort. A person will go to college for 4 years, and they'll do an internship, and then they'll do whatever, and they're probably 30 years old before they get their first decent paycheck many times.
Yes.
Whereas the truck driver gets a really good paycheck starting about the first year,
Right, exactly.
And if they really get in the truck and stay in the truck and don't spend their money on anything and become disciplined, at 30, they could probably pay cash for a nice home or a lot of money down, and they wouldn't have any student loan debt. But anyway, we don't want to go there.
Absolutely.
But, it's just amazing. I mean, I saw something the other day where people are making 70 cents a mile. I mean, can you believe that?
It's needed. I mean, really, drivers have never really had a raise. It's always been in that, 45 to 60 cent range.
Right.
So it's good to see. And it's funny you say something about the 18-year-olds. You're like the third person in the last 2 weeks that's brought that up. And everybody makes this point, but they're allowed to go vote and they're allowed to go to war, but they can't drive a semi truck. And another thing that Trump is now, I know this is kind of off the subject, but in the same part, he's trying to get it where military people can get CDLs and drive. That's an insurance deal, and that's probably part of the 18-year-old deal is, as a recruiter, I'd have a lot of people, try to get a job and they've got all this military experience, and then yet none of it's usable. And I'm thinking, well, okay, maybe they didn't drive a semi truck on, in interstate in Houston with 8 lanes, or in a small corridor, they got to back it in. But if they can drive that kind of equipment, in the worst places in the world and train for that kind of stuff, it wouldn't take a lot to get them moved over to the commercial side, and so I even hope that works out better, because I feel like veterans need all the chances they can get. But I like the ruling of going out of state really makes no sense to me. I mean, like you said, Houston's just it's right there. You go through Orange and Port Arthur, and boom, you're right there at Louisiana, and it's crazy. And I hope that kind of changes, because what do you do? So, what do you do if you're an 18-year-old and your passion is to be a truck driver, but you really can't be? I mean, in the state of Texas, you could still be a true truck driver, because, like you said, it's 800 miles from one end to the other. But if you're in a smaller state, or what do you do? There's 3 or 4 years you really can't do a lot, because you got to wait.
I mean, well, in the Northeast, what is it? New Hampshire, or one of those states up there is a part. It's like 60, 70 miles across. So you couldn't do much. What I encourage people to do, go to work for maybe a food service company as a helper. Go to work on a dock, and it's not quite, with all the stuff going on now, you don't have many, it doesn't seem like you have as many dock workers as you used to, just the way that things work now. But go to work in that industry. Go to work for somewhere where they have trucks, and they're at some point, either you take the initiative to go to truck driving school, or they'll put you in truck driving school.
Good. That's good.
And so, there's things that you can do. And if you go to work, maybe it's the beverage company that, where Anheuser-Busch is right across the street from us here, the warehouse. So, tons of trucks coming in and out of there. But, the delivery side to stores or whatever, it's a little physical work, but almost all of them have a helper. The CDL driver may drive the truck, but it's a CDL, but they all have helpers. So build that reputation with your company, get in there, get the CDL, drive for them. And I love what you said earlier, drive for a company for a while, learn what they're doing, you may not want the headache of actually owning a truck.
Right.
Because you think your world is regulated as a driver, double or triple that as
Right.
a owner. Now,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of companies out there that provide support for that, and you
Right.
can do it, but it's not there again. It's not for everybody, and we
Right.
encourage our students here. Please don't go out and buy a truck. We
Well,
have people who their family maybe is in the trucking industry and they go right into that part. Well, that's one thing, but if you are, so to speak, this is your first, you know,
go around. Yeah.
yeah, just drive, learn on somebody else's time, and even the large companies out there have lease programs. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to get in the industry at some point, but get in that transportation industry. We have the city of Houston is really good about hiring people and at some point giving them a chance to get a promotion. Now I know that you don't want to take your training and run, but at the same time, a lot of companies, these warehouse companies, and their warehouses are popping up everywhere. I don't know
Yeah.
why, but every square, every vacant lot on the
Yeah.
beltway here is now a warehouse, and so somebody's moving that stuff around, and you can drive a forklift at 18, and you can work and show your worth by coming to work at a different time. Yeah, I mean, coming to
Mhm.
work at on time and being a good employee, and then people are willing to invest in you because
Absolutely.
drivers are hard to come by. As a recruiter, you know this.
Hmm.
Retention's a big problem, and
Yes.
if you can find the right person that's a good employee and step them up and put faith and confidence in them and show them in almost every case the driver makes the most money, um, or it'll be a substantial raise for them, and then you're
Absolutely.
in that industry, then you decide what to do with it, and you may decide to stay at that company forever. There's some good warehouse companies around here that move freight all over town every day and run short routes and that type of stuff, but they typically don't go to the entry level driver trainer, and especially the young person. So go into that
Right.
industry because they're always looking for labor.
Yeah, you made two great points there. The one of, and I like it, going to work for a warehouse, but and getting that knowledge, being a helper, and learning the trucking industry from the inside out. But the other, you made a great point that I tell young drivers all the time, and honestly, even very veteran drivers, when you bounce from company to company, just because you've got 20 years on your resume, you're not going to go to the new company and get the best routes. It's going to somebody that's
Right.
proven to that person at that industry in that company that they can do the job because they're putting responsibility. So yeah, if you've been at a warehouse as a helper and you've been there for 2 or 3 years and they even help you get into school, you could get to the good lanes very quick because not only you learn what I think is very important is the communication from the driver to the customer. So if you're delivering all the time, you make a good rapport with a couple stops. Well, you might can come right in because they might recommendation like, hey, he's a good
Right.
good person or she is, and go out of the way, very polite, and that goes a long way. And then another point I would like to make before we move on to the next segment is drivers shouldn't go and get their authority first either. They should lease even if they buy the truck, that's fine. But go lease on, learn how to be an owner operator. That's a business. It's not, hey, let's just go buy a truck and boom, I get the big check. No, it's so many checks and balances in between that. And I have so many horror stories from a driver coming from a company and then buys his truck and then just goes, gets his authority, and then 60 days into it, they're calling me going, can you help me get a company driver? I'm fixing to file bankruptcy because I can't pay for my truck payment because I can't get any loads because, no one talks about that. So,
Right.
it's just, a lot of things that, but I really like that, idea for the younger ones to go into that. But I'd like to get into the association that you're a part of, the National Association of Publicly Funded Truck Driving Schools. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization and what all they do?
Yeah, we are a group of schools, just like Houston community colleges, VOTEC colleges around the country. A few municipalities are part of our organization, but the entry into what we do is if you are funded by the public, a public entity like a government entity or whatever. You're not a proprietary school. There's an organization for that. And so what we do, we have an annual conference. We have what we call regional meetings in the fall, which we have about 6 meetings throughout the country. And we exchange information. We have speakers come in. We'll have federal motor carrier. We'll have local DOT officers. We're about education, so we usually have people come in that teaching something about the education side. And so we constantly want to upgrade what we do and make sure that we know what's going on. We have close ties with AMBA, which is the licensing, the testing models and all that come through AMBA. So what's going on, what to look for next, that type of thing. So we have about, I think we're sitting at 178 members, I believe. We also have carriers that are members. A lot of your large carriers or members and supporters, and then simulation companies, anybody that deals with the training industry. Carriers hire our students, that type of thing. So our goal is to create, good content. And the old thing is like, share, network, because probably somebody has already had the problem that you're having. Probably somebody has maybe hopefully solved the problem that you're having and is more than happy to share that information. I was talking to the school yesterday, and I won't call it out, but they've been in business. I mean, it's college and a large college, and they put in a truck driving program. And the guy that's running the program has not come to any of our meetings currently. He's a relatively new member. And he reached out to me, and just some very simple things like, how do you go about getting recruiters to come into your facility, and who do you trust, and that type thing. I was very happy to share. And so then I immediately reached out to a whole lot of people that I know and said, hey, do you have recruiters in that area, and copied them on the email. So, and the one thing that we've done since 2015, is we've had a really good connection with Federal Motor Carrier. And along with CBTA, we have what's called the ELD task force. And we meet quarterly with the administrator, the general counsel, and the people that make all the decisions there. And we have input. I'll be so bold to say, if you look at the Federal Motor Carrier agenda that they put out just a couple of weeks ago, there's several things in there that are just right on what we asked for. Awesome. If it's their idea, that's great, but it's what we asked for. And so for rulemaking and that type thing, because we've done this through several administrations, but this administration is very active. And I think, some of it comes from the fact that, the administrator is a law enforcement person. So he thinks enforcement. He has actually went out and visited probably a dozen schools. And so the reason why I bring that up is he's coordinated that with the 2 associations. Like, hey, I have to be, I'm in a meeting in New Orleans one time, up in Louisville, Kentucky, that type of thing. And so he'll say, where's a school that I can go to and talk to people? That's awesome. Literally he'll bring in, some field people and that type of stuff. And they'll spend 2 or 3 hours. They talk to instructors, they talk to administration, they talk to the students. And so they have a whole lot better feel than what we've seen in the past. And so we only hope to grow that. And so as an association, we go to them and say, hey, we represent X number of people, X number of students, X number of schools, that type of thing. And of course, on the private side too. And so our goals are much the same, is that we want the right people there training the right way. It doesn't matter whether you're public or private at that point. I'm on the public side, and that's where I live and make my money. So I'm very high on that. But at the same time, there is schools out there, and there's not public schools everywhere for CDL. So we know that it's a combination, and we can't fill all the seats. That the appetite for drivers is huge. So that's what we do. We have a board. We have a very active board. We encourage people to be involved with their local state associations. And so many people have gotten involved in that. And you even have a voice at your own state legislature. And so to help with that, sometime with research and that type of thing, we're able to go out to, we have members in I think 38 states. So we're able to go out to 38 states and say, hey, what is going on in your state about such and such, testing or whatever. So we can immediately get some feedback and say, okay, here's the way that this was taken care of. And so, it's that networking that I think is the most important thing. And then, the other part, the side effect of that is really lifelong friends that you make through your association, even though they might be somewhere else. You see them a couple times a year, but your program is similar to their program, and so you talk a lot. So it's that constant sharing of information, and we get things. We're fortunate to get things kind of up front sometime. We're able to immediately share that with our group. So that's the big benefit.
Well,
And then, of course, on the association side, it's having access to our members to sell them simulators or curriculum and all the different things like that.
yeah, I wish the industry would take note of that. It's the industry is so fragmented. I talk about it all the
Right.
time, and I get it. You're afraid that this person's going to find out what you're doing, and it might take but we all know what everybody's fairly doing. We all know who's got the customers. I wish they would come together more, and I do think on the fraud side it would help a lot because a lot of them are already dealing with things, and then it trickles down to other companies, and then they have to go through the whole issue because nobody wants to share anything. So as a person, that's in the industry, I appreciate, a group getting together and even if it's a bad situation and you go through what you did, if it saves the next school from having to go through as much or catching it in the beginning, that's great. It saves the industry overall. So
Yeah.
that's awesome that y'all do that.
I'll give you a quick example. When we were notified that they were going to do the investigations for the month of July, and so they started sending out the emails and that type of thing. But we were able to alert our members up front. Okay, we were able to communicate what the audits were going to look like after the first day, and we were able to share that with all our people. So that kind of real time information, and I got a lot of positive feedback from that. But it wasn't me; it was collectively for us to be able to head that up. So belonging to our association, what does it do? It gives you a lot of access to a lot of information that otherwise you wouldn't receive, and a significant amount of help. It's just a phone call away or an email away.
That's awesome. I want to get to the training provider registry that the FMCSA has, put in. I know it's changed driver education some. How's it affected schools or your school in general, you think?
Well, the training provider registry is broken, and I've told everybody that. And the first thing is because it's self-certification. So you can go on, and now there's been some changes over the last year, 18 months. But originally, when it come out in 2022, it was like, okay, what do you teach the ELD curriculum? Yes. Do you have equipment? Whatever. Yes. All self-certification. Nothing was checked. Nothing. So immediately you got to okay back. So over a period of time, and with us lobbying hard with them, showing them the flaws, now that they're moving away from self-certification, and now what they're asking for, and the latest number, I think 39% of all the people that applied to the registry was declined because they don't meet the qualifications. The idea is good. Okay. Entry level driver training is the ELDT part, the mandated part. Would we like a little bit more in it? Some of us, yes, some no, but that's okay. Okay. But the fact that people are not teaching it or they are not obeying the rules, it says you must obey all state, federal, and local guidelines, or meet all state, federal, and local guidelines. So if you're a private school and you're not registered with the state and you're required to be registered with the state, you shouldn't be on there. But there's no place on there that they ask you for your state license. Now, as a course of, when you apply, then they start asking you for information. And so we hope that in this next rulemaking, that they will have it, they see the flaws and hopefully it goes through. But the process of regulation, if you're familiar with it, they make the regulation, they put it out for public comment, they go back and decide to either change or not change things, and it goes to the Office of Management Budget, and there's a cost benefit analysis. And whoever thought a regulation has a cost benefit analysis, but it really does, or at least
Right.
I go like, okay, well, whatever, I think that costs a lot of money, but y'all say it's good, but whatever.
Right.
And so once it goes through there, then it becomes a final rule. And so we'll see. They're wanting to do the right things to fix the TPR. And that's that's the initial problem. And what you said earlier, they said in 2015, and it's public record. If you're bored and you want to go to sleep, can't go to sleep at night, read all of the background of the Interlevel Driver Training Advisory Committee recommendations and the meeting minutes. But they said we will never be able to enforce it because we don't have the people. Okay. So now this administration has said, you figure it out how to enforce it. And so they have started a process and they will continue that process. And Monday they told us, they said, we have a next round. They'll be coming up later on this year of enforcement. And so it's not perfect, but it's moving in the right direction. So the training provider registry should be a place where you could go, and we talked earlier about that, was a student, a person interested. They should be able to go in, and now you can put in the zip code or whatever, and you can see all the schools in your area. But it's every school, good, bad, or indifferent, that a state school, not a state school. And, I should have said earlier, also, if you're looking at a private school, look and see if they're registered in the state. Because if they're not registered and they're not really a state school or not licensed by the state, if they fold up today, you have no recourse.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because there's no license there's no oversight of that school. So anyway, but those are some of the things that, we're working hard on, and Federal Motor Carrier is working hard on. And we're just hoping that all that is complete and tied up in a nice package during this administration, because we know what we have in this administration. Yes. And the political appointees, their last day is the last day that President Trump is in office, no matter who wins the next office. They may get reappointed or not, whatever, but they know that, they have that length of time. And so the clock is ticking and they're working fast and furious on that. So
that's well said there. I agree, because we as people in the industry, we're already looking to that, right? We're trying to figure out who's going to be next. For the trucking industry, I kind of hope nothing really changes. I hope, JD or whoever's the next appointed Republican and keeps the same things that they're doing now, at least for another term or two, just to try to get all these things fixed before something crazy happens and everything changes and goes, complete, 180. Right. And but one thing I wanted to ask you, you was talking about work association. I had the Mr. Sparza, John Sparza, on trucking, Texas Truck Association on probably about a month or so, and I was very impressed what he was trying to get accomplished in the things that the state of Texas does. As I'd said on that show, pretty much what happens in Texas kind of goes on out to the rest of the country, because Texas is such a important market to the like you said, Houston's probably one of the most important markets in all of trucking, because of so much freight moving through various different ways. Do you do a lot with them? Do y'all have a good relationship with them and things that y'all try to do within the state?
Oh, absolutely. That's the best softball question you've given me. John Esparza, the first, I think, speech he ever gave when he came here, I think 20 years ago, I think he's been here 20 years now or close to it, was at a NAPFTDS conference, actually, that was an annual conference in Texas. And the conference committee invited him to come and speak, and it was one of his first. And so we developed a relationship. And then I just got reelected, I think my third term as on the board of directors for TXDA. Huge. And I'll give you a couple quick examples. Third-party testing was dead in the water in Texas. We were waiting weeks and weeks to get people tested. I had sometimes 4 and 5 trucks at different locations for hours waiting on people to get tested. Well, that's non-productive for the student. It's a money loser, and there's just nothing to it. So the people that issued the license, DPS, was in no way, shape, or form was interested in third-party testing. But working with John Esparza, he got us into the right people at the governor's office, which the governor is over the Department of Public Safety. Mm-hmm. We got an ear to the right person. It moved forward. They formed a committee. John made sure that the right people were on the committee. He has the ear of the governor. And so we were able to get that done relatively quick. And then some of our schools that are close to the border wanted to be able to test out-of-state people. It might be easier for a person to go into school in wherever, Amarillo or whatever, East Texas, rather than maybe a school in Louisiana or whatever. And so talked to John, and he put him and his Dana Moore was legislative liaison at that point, and we talked to the senator, state senator over transportation, and he goes, "Yep, I'm for that. I'll put it in the bill."
Awesome.
It happened. So we have been very much involved in that. I've been fortunate to call him a very good friend, and I will meet with him in the next week or two, and we'll talk about the legislative session coming up, because people in Texas are saying, "Hey, we're seeing these horror stories in other places. What can we do to hopefully that doesn't happen in Texas?" Have a great relationship, and it just goes from being around him using me for educational purposes, so to speak. And
Right.
it's just a good relationship. So I would encourage everyone to get heavily involved in their state association, because that's the voice of trucking.
Mm-hmm.
And John Esparza is the best. I'm very partial because he is Texas and I'm Texas. So, but a great guy.
Yeah, I enjoyed our interview and time to speak. He was very educational and very passionate about the industry and the state of Texas, which was
He is.
really enjoyable to talk with. I want to talk with you a minute before we get off here about everything we always said it was negative in on TV and social media, and it's become a big issue, and it's driver verification. Now with the Supreme Court, it seems like the brokers have really got to figure out a way to try to protect themselves as much as possible. And that is something that we've been working on for a while at Ready App. It's no secret. I'm, head of operations over there. I'm very passionate about trying to help the truck driver and help the industry any way we can. But one thing that they're doing, or we're doing there, is a digital driver's passport. It stores every document that a driver needs, from a CDL to a medical card to pictures of his truck, his insurance. I mean, any document that he needs or she needs to be onboarded, that if it gets pulled over by a DOT officer, if they need to send their information, of course, they own their information and they can share any of it with the click of a button. But one thing that we're really wanting to try to do is get it into schools and help these drivers. And the father and son that I was talking about earlier that we met at the Texas Truck Show a couple weeks ago, he said it's like a early resume, because it keeps all their work history. It'll create a DOT application for them. Of course, there's all type of driver benefits and everything in there that drivers can get, and fuel card discounts and everything else. But do you see where that's going to become more and more important? Because I mean, there's nothing out there to verify who's driving the truck. And we're trying to help that part of the sector to help drivers, because we're going to have a driver score to kind of give you an idea. It's ready score, and a driver will be scored not kind of like how it is with with the broker just saying a couple bad things, they get a bad score. This is going to keep up kind of like a credit score, that for a credit card, where they go to school, they get some. If it's a reputable school, they get more points. The longer they're at a job facility, if they've been working for 2 years, boom, they get a higher score, to try to separate the good drivers from the mediocre drivers, so maybe they can get a little bit more pay. We're going to then carry that over to a fleet score to try to help the brokers be able to go, okay, this carrier might have an 85 driver, but their overall score for all their drivers on their current roster is a 90. I can work with them. How important do you see something like that within the future?
I, with what you've just described, I think that's a great idea, because the more transparency, the better it is. And we see a lot of misrepresentation in the industry, and that the problems of a few create problems for everyone. And so I think that's going in our direction, going in the right direction. AMBA is working on and hoping to, in the next 2 to 3 years, to where all driver's licenses are actually digital. It'll be harder to steal. So who would have thought 20, 30 years ago that everything we ever needed was on a phone? But it's getting to that, and that is I mean, the ELDs that are being hacked, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Federal Motor Carriers got to address that in this next deal. I mean, they're just there's so many things. So yes, I think there has to be something to help the broker, because you don't have time. I mean, you have to be able to to
You got to
trust the
trust.
people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so how do you do that? And so yes, I think anything that brings people together and has that transparency where you can quickly look at a whole lot of different
Data.
things that a person has done, gives you better options because you look at, I mean, maybe I don't know, this popped in my head. Maybe it's like a consumer report,
Yeah,
typically,
kind of like. Yep, that's a good
um,
observation.
you know,
Well,
you know,
it just dialogues everything the driver's done. It shows all their work history. Now, like we have a thing called driver verify, where the driver has to be verified by the carrier. They still work with the dispatcher, so you don't want to send a lot of information that the driver would share to the carrier because the carrier's got that vicarious liability that they're still trying to figure out that ruling. It's quite a bit of gray area there of what you can, what you can't. So it's a work in progress, but if you can verify that the driver is who they are, they match the picture. We'll have digital scanning where the picture matches their photo and their CDL. At pickup, at delivery, and then they can go in and see the roster of that carrier to see that driver is actually with that carrier. That helps saves a lot of it. So I appreciate your thoughts on that because that's something that we're pretty passionate about. But I want to get you out of here. I know I'm pushing the hour long that we had done, but just one quick question. In the next 5-10 years, things are going to change a lot with AI and everything else that's going on. How do you think driver education will change over the next decade? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, I think the role of the driver will continue to change, and it'll be up to us in the education side of things to be able to embrace that and be able to teach that. Autonomous trucking will work in some
Mm,
areas. We have quite a few coming out of Houston. I
Texas.
mean,
Yep.
people go like, "Oh, there's 300 trucks in the United States." Okay, well, there's probably 300 trucks just went by the road that you know while we
In
were
the last
talking.
5 minutes,
So
right? Yeah.
yeah, so it's minuscule, but it will happen, and at what point we don't know. But the role of the driver, I mean, the driver will never go away. Who's going to inspect that truck? Who's going to be responsible? Who's going to oversee that truck? And so it may be for that. Maybe that's going to appeal to the younger generation where it's more computer oriented or
True.
like remote
Very
from
good point.
home or may fit more in that category of where, but there's going to have to be continual oversight. So I say the role of the driver, the role of the operator, we may not call him a driver anymore, we may call him an operator or whatever. It's going to
Right.
change, but we'll have to look and see what federal motor carrier is going to require because
Mm,
that's not stated yet. And then the federal motor carrier needs to put out the guidelines, and then we'll know what to teach. But I think that we'll continue to have drivers for local delivery.
yeah.
So many different areas. So, in their own perfect world, the number of autonomous trucks is going to be very limited compared to the 3.5 million or whatever that
Yep.
number is that's out there. So I think that we'll have to continue to look at that. And there's actually a group of us that meet that has a couple autonomous trucks manufacturers or the manufacturers
Hmm.
of technology that's part of that group, and we usually try to meet quarterly and just kind of updates. And so they're eager to make sure that the technology that the manpower that's needed going forward is going to be trained and available. So that's something that we are watching and will
Hmm.
continue to adapt and be able to teach what's needed for that next generation. But trucking's here to stay. I mean, I feel very confident for
Absolutely.
the 21-year, 25-year-old guy. Will you be able to drive a truck for your whole career? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Technology is going to change so much in that truck. It's already changed from the first
Right.
generation. And like what I tell drivers all the time, if you're really worried about it, go be a flatbedder. They're not gonna they're gonna have to be a driver in that truck because no one's gonna take liability of that securement of that load. They're gonna want somebody with it for insurance purposes. So just find the niche, be a heavy hauler.
Right.
Those jobs will always be there. And I just don't know if they can ever get the demand. It'll take a long time to get the demand of trucks out there to swap out, 3 million, trucks that are on the road or even more than that, maybe, so I agree with you totally on that. But Martin, thanks so much for joining me today. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. The work you're doing at Houston Community College and through the National Association of Public Funding Trucking Driving Schools is really help preparing the past generations and the new generations of professional drivers. So I personally appreciate the work you've done, and I know everyone does. And I appreciate you again, like I said, coming in and giving us the insight of schools and education. But before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know, how to get in touch with y'all's program at the college, and then with y'all's program, where they can find more information on both?
Yeah, actually, Houston Community College changed their name last year, and now we're Houston City College because we offer some 4-year degree programs. But if you type in Houston Community College, Houston City College, CDL program, and it'll pop up and it'll have contact information in that. That's the easiest way. It's hcc.edu. And then just put in truck driving under the search engine or whatever. The association is NAPFTDS.org. And there's a lot of information on that. And then there's info at our association where you can ask for more information. My contact information should be there. And I have emails at both places, so I can be reached at that point. But thanks for having me on, and look forward to following up sometime. And we got plenty more to discuss.
Yes, sir. I'll definitely have to have you on. Like I said, again, thank you for joining us for another episode of Trucking Conversations with Justin Holder, presented by Trucker Talk Radio. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share this episode with someone who cares about the future of transportation. We're on all the different social channels: YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn. Go in, just share the platform. Let's educate everybody we can. And until next time, stay safe, keep learning, and I'll see you on the next conversation. Thank you again. Today's episode is sponsored by Gray Cross. Every day, professional drivers make sacrifices that most people never see. Long hours, missed holidays, time away from family, and the responsibility of keeping America's supply chain moving. Gray Cross was created to support those drivers and their families when life takes an unexpected turn. By providing assistance, resources, and support during the difficult times, Gray Cross helps strengthen the trucking community one family at a time. Because behind every truck is a driver. Behind every driver is a family counting on them. If you'd like to support the mission, visit graycross.org to learn more. Donations are always appreciated, but simply sharing their message with others in the industry can make a tremendous difference. Gray Cross, supporting the people who keep America moving. Today's episode is brought to you by ReadyApp. Trust is the one most valuable asset in transportation. That's why ReadyApp created Driver Verify. Driver Verify helps carriers, brokers, and transportation companies gain greater confidence through verified driver identities, professional credentials, work history, and onboarding visibility. Drivers can securely maintain CDL information, endorsements, certifications, and employment records all in one professional profile. As fraud continues to impact the transportation industry, verification has never been more important. ReadyApp, verified drivers, trusted freight. Go check them out at ready-app.com.